The morning sun rose over Willow Creek, painting the quiet Alabama town in shades of gold and gray. Birds whistled in the distance, and the streets smelled faintly of dew and diesel. Every morning, like clockwork, Harold Bennett drove down Main Street in his old blue Ford pickup truck, a relic that looked like it belonged in a museum rather than on the road. The truck coughed, sputtered, and rattled with every mile, the kind of vehicle that made people turn their heads, but not for good reasons. The paint had long faded, rust hugged the fenders, and the tailgate was held up by a frayed rope. The windows rolled down only halfway, and the radio worked when it wanted to. But to Harold, that old truck wasn't junk, it was home. He'd had it since his early 20s, back when life was simpler, when his wife Gloria was still alive and the town hadn't yet been swallowed by fast food chains and new money. Now, Harold was 58, widowed, quiet, and content to live in his small house at the edge of town. He worked part-time fixing tractors for farmers, mowing lawns, and hauling scrap metal, jobs that paid little but kept his mind and hands busy. He didn't have much, and folks knew it. But what they didn't know, what no one in Willow Creek had even begun to guess, was that the old blue truck they laughed at held a secret far greater than any of them could imagine. At Jim's Diner, the local breakfast spot, Harold often stopped for his usual, black coffee and 2 eggs over easy. The regulars, mostly men half his age, sat in the corner booth laughing about everything from politics to pickup trucks. And Harold's truck always came up. "Man, that old Ford sounds like it's begging for retirement," said Ricky Turner, a mechanic from the next town over, sipping his Coke. Laughter erupted. "You sure it's not held together with duct tape?" another chimed in. Harold would sit a few stools away at the counter, pretending not to hear, though everyone knew he did. He'd just smile politely, take another sip of his coffee, and look out the window toward his truck parked out front, gleaming dully under the sunlight. To most people, it was just an old heap of metal. To Harold, it was a promise he intended to keep. No one really knew much about Harold Bennett. He wasn't a man who talked about himself. He lived on the same property his father had owned before him, out on County Road 12, past the cornfields and the rusted railroad tracks. Neighbors said he kept to himself. Some thought he was just lonely. Others said he was stubborn, too proud to move on or modernize. But there were rumors too. Some said Harold had once been an engineer. Others swore he'd been in the military. And a few whispered that he'd gotten a large inheritance once and blew it all. Harold never confirmed nor denied any of it. He simply smiled, said people talk, and went about his day. The only person Harold seemed to talk to regularly was Jalen, a 17-year-old boy who lived down the road. Jalen's mother worked 2 jobs and was rarely home, and his father had left years ago. Harold took a liking to the boy, saw something in his quiet curiosity, his habit of asking questions no one else cared about. "Mr. Bennett," Jalen asked one afternoon, wiping grease from his hands, "why don't you ever sell that old truck? You could probably get a newer one, something with AC and power steering." Harold chuckled, looking at the truck as though it were an old friend. "Son, that truck's been with me longer than you've been alive. We've been through too much together to call it quits now." "Yeah, but it's like, ancient," Jalen pressed. "What makes it so special?" Harold gave a slow grin. "Some things don't need to be shiny to be valuable, boy. You'll understand that someday." Jalen frowned, clearly not convinced, but he didn't ask again. Later that week, Harold pulled into Benny's Gas and Tire, an old filling station that hadn't changed in decades. Benny, the owner, a talkative man in his 60s, leaned against the pump. "Harold, I don't know how you keep that thing running," he said, nodding toward the truck. "Looks like it's been through a war." Harold smiled. "That's the thing, Benny. It has." Benny raised an eyebrow. "What's that supposed to mean?" Harold didn't answer. He just tipped his cap, paid for his gas, and drove off, leaving Benny scratching his head as the truck sputtered down the road. Inside the truck, taped to the dashboard, was an old photograph, a black and white picture of Harold in his 20s, standing beside the same truck, wearing a uniform. The edges were worn, the corners bent. Underneath the photo, in faded handwriting, were the words, For Gloria. Keep it safe. That night, as rain tapped against the tin roof of his small garage, Harold sat in the driver's seat of the truck with the doors closed and the engine off. He ran his hand along the steering wheel, the cracked leather smooth under his calloused fingers. In the glove compartment, wrapped in an old cloth, lay a small metal box, one that hadn't seen daylight in years. Harold opened it, revealing a collection of bank documents, folded letters, and an antique key. The key was engraved with a name, Birmingham National Bank, Private Deposit. He stared at it for a long moment before closing the box again, sighing deeply. It had been over 20 years since he last set foot in that bank. Over 20 years since he made the promise. And though most people thought his truck was a relic, what it carried beneath the worn seat, hidden beneath layers of old floor mats and welded panels, was something that could change his life forever. But Harold wasn't ready yet. Not until the time was right. By the end of that summer, Willow Creek was buzzing with new development projects. The town council was offering to buy up land for a new shopping center, and Harold's property sat right in the middle of it. Developers knocked on his door with smiles and contracts. "Mr. Bennett, we're offering well above market value," one said, his tie too tight for the Alabama heat. Harold shook his head. "Not selling." They pressed. He refused. Rumors started again. "He's broke, he's crazy, that old truck must be the only thing he's got left." Even Jalen asked, "Mr. Bennett, why not sell and move somewhere nicer? You'd have it easy." Harold's gaze was distant as he looked toward the truck parked under the magnolia tree. "Some things you protect, son. Even when nobody understands why." One night, just after midnight, a shadow moved across Harold's property. A group of young men, the same ones who used to mock his truck, crept toward the old Ford, laughing under their breath. "Let's give this old piece of junk a surprise," one whispered, pulling a can of spray paint from his pocket. Before they could do anything, the porch light flicked on. Harold stepped out, calm and unbothered, holding a flashlight in one hand and a wrench in the other. "Evenin', boys," he said quietly. "You lost?" The boys froze, embarrassed. "Just jokin', old man," one stammered. Harold's voice stayed even. "Ain't nothing funny about disrespect." They backed away, mumbling as they disappeared into the darkness. Harold watched until they were gone, then turned toward the truck. His eyes softened, but his jaw stayed firm. He reached under the chassis and checked a small latch, one no one else knew existed. It was still locked. Still untouched. He exhaled, relieved. Because under that rusty old truck bed, sealed in a hidden compartment, rested something worth more than all the houses and stores in Willow Creek combined. And soon, very soon, the whole town would find out. The days in Willow Creek grew longer and hotter as summer rolled on. The cicadas screamed from the trees, and the sun seemed to hang over the town like a spotlight that refused to dim. For Harold Bennett, the heat wasn't the problem. It was the noise, not from the bugs, but from the people. Everywhere he went, it seemed someone had something to say about his old blue truck. "Still running, huh? When you finally gonna junk that thing, Harold? You holding out for a miracle?" He smiled through it all, nodded, and kept driving. But each time he heard the snickers or caught the side glances, a quiet ache pulsed somewhere deep inside him. They didn't know what that truck meant. They didn't know what it held. And maybe, he thought, it was better that way. Jalen had been coming around more often lately. He was young, eager, restless, the kind of boy who wanted answers to everything. One afternoon, he helped Harold replace a tire on an old tractor. Sweat dripped down both their foreheads, and the thick Alabama air smelled like grease and honeysuckle. "Mr. Bennett," Jalen said, brushing his hands on his jeans, "why do people in town always talk about you like you're weird?" Harold gave a slow smile. "Because people don't understand what they can't see." "Yeah, but they say you're just a poor old man with a junkyard truck," Jalen continued, hesitant. "You don't even seem mad about it." Harold tightened a bolt, his movements steady. "Being mad don't change truth, son. I know what I got. And one day, folks will too." Jalen nodded, unsure what that meant, but the words stuck with him. A few days later, two sleek black cars rolled up Harold's dirt driveway. The sound of tires crunching gravel drew him out of his garage. A tall man in a gray suit stepped out, flanked by two others carrying clipboards. His name was Mr. Lewis, representing a company called Magnolia Development Group. "Mr. Bennett," Lewis said with a wide, rehearsed smile, "I'm here again because we'd really love to make a deal. The town council's eager to move forward, and your property is, well, let's just say it's prime real estate." Harold leaned against the truck, squinting at the men. "You boys already got my answer." "I understand," Lewis continued smoothly. "But things are changing, Mr. Bennett. We're building a future here, new homes, better schools, jobs. Surely you don't want to hold the town back?" "I've seen plenty of men talk about the future," Harold replied, his tone firm but calm. "Funny thing is, it always seems to cost someone their past." Lewis's smile faltered for a split second. "Well, we can make it worth your while. Double what we offered before." Harold pushed off the truck, wiped his hands, and looked the man square in the eye. "Not for sale." The air went still. The younger assistant scribbled something on his clipboard. Lewis exhaled sharply, closing his folder. "You're making a mistake, Mr. Bennett." Harold just smiled faintly. "Wouldn't be my first." As they walked back to their cars, one of them muttered, "Old fool's probably hiding scrap metal in that truck." Harold didn't flinch, but his jaw tightened. He turned, gave the truck a gentle pat on its fender, and whispered, "They'll know soon enough, old girl." That evening, the skies opened up and rain poured in thick sheets. Lightning cracked across the fields, and thunder shook the windows. Harold sat in his garage, the only light coming from a single hanging bulb. The truck sat there, silent and unmoving, as if waiting. He opened the hood, checked the engine, then crawled underneath. His hands felt for a small latch near the back end, one hidden beneath years of rust and grime. Click. A small compartment door swung open, revealing a steel lockbox bolted into the truck's frame. Inside it, layers of plastic-wrapped envelopes, a ledger, and several gold coins gleamed faintly in the dim light. Harold brushed off the dust, his heart heavy with the weight of memories. Each envelope was labeled in careful handwriting: Investments, 1998, Birmingham Bonds, Real Estate, Bay County. It was all still there. The secret Gloria had trusted him to keep safe. 20 years ago, before she passed, they'd built a quiet fortune together, modest but growing, from land investments, war bonds, and gold savings his father had left him. When corporate buyers tried to seize his land back then, Gloria made him promise, if they ever come again, hide it. Keep it safe until it's needed, until it can mean something. And Harold had done exactly that. The next morning, Jalen came by to help fix the lawnmower. He found Harold sitting in a chair, clutching his arm and grimacing. "Mr. Bennett. You okay?" "Old bones," Harold said with a weak laugh. "Took a spill last night in the rain. Nothing serious." But it was serious. By noon, Jalen drove him to the local clinic. The doctor said it was a sprain, but Harold needed rest. While Jalen waited outside, he noticed the truck parked nearby, the same faded blue, dented, and stubbornly alive. But this time, something caught his eye, a small metal latch under the rear bumper, half visible through the mud. He bent down, curious, but before he could touch it, Harold called out, "Hey, boy! Don't mess with that." Jalen jumped. "Sorry, sir. Just thought something was loose." Harold's eyes softened. "Ain't nothing loose on that truck that I don't want loose." The boy nodded, though his curiosity burned brighter than ever. A week later, Harold's refusal to sell made local gossip hotter than July asphalt. At Jim's diner, Ricky Turner, the mechanic who loved to mock Harold, was bragging again. "You know what I heard?" Ricky said, smirking. "Old Harold's sitting on a pile of junk because he's broke. Probably thinks that truck's his savings account." Someone else snickered. "Or maybe there's something in it. Heard my cousin say he saw the old man working on it all night." "Ha! Yeah right," Ricky said. If there was anything valuable in that heap, it'd have fallen out by now. Behind them, Jalen sat alone at the counter, silently listening. His mother's voice echoed in his head, "That old man's been through enough. Be kind to him." He finished his meal quietly and slipped out the door. That evening, Jalen stopped by Harold's house. The garage door was open, but Harold wasn't there. On the workbench lay an open photo album, old black and white pictures of Harold and Gloria standing beside the truck through the decades. Some showed Harold in uniform. Others, with his young wife holding their baby daughter, smiling under that same magnolia tree. Jalen turned the pages slowly, then froze at one photo, Harold shaking hands with a man in a suit beside a bank building. Written under it, "First Deposit, Birmingham National Bank." His eyes darted toward the truck, and for the first time, he realized Harold wasn't just some lonely old man. That truck wasn't just sentimental. It was history. It was protection. Outside, Harold stood by the edge of his porch, staring out toward the road, his face shadowed by twilight. He knew what the town thought of him, the laughter, the whispers, the pity. But he also knew something they didn't. That sometimes, life hides its greatest treasures in the things people overlook. And soon, when the time came, the whole town would learn just how wrong they'd been. The heat didn't let up that August. The air in Willow Creek was thick enough to chew, and the road shimmered like liquid glass. At Harold Bennett's property, the world was quiet, except for the soft hum of cicadas and the low rustle of leaves. Inside the garage, Harold sat in his old rocking chair, a faded photo of Gloria on the table beside him. He rubbed the ache in his shoulder, sighed, and whispered, "Wish you were here, baby. Folks are getting restless." A truck rumbled past on the main road. The laughter of young men drifted through the open window. He didn't need to look to know who it was. Ricky Turner and his friends, boys with more pride than purpose. They'd been pushing things lately. Not just jokes or whispers, but small pranks, nails in the driveway, garbage tossed near his fence. It wasn't the first time Harold had faced disrespect. But something about their cruelty, the way they mocked not just his truck but his dignity, cut deeper than before. Still, he kept his head down. That was his way. Until the day they went too far. It happened on a Friday evening. The sun was low, the air golden and heavy. Harold was at the diner, quietly eating his supper. Jalen burst through the door, panting hard. "Mr. Bennett. You gotta come quick." Harold dropped his fork. "What's wrong, son?" They're out at your place." Jalen stammered. "Ricky and them. They're spray painting your truck." For a moment, Harold just stared, as if the words didn't register. Then his eyes darkened with something Jalen had never seen before, not anger, but hurt. He stood, grabbed his hat, and walked out without a word. When he reached his property, the scene hit him like a punch. Ricky and his buddies were laughing near the garage, cans of red spray paint in their hands. Across the side of the blue truck, the words "Old Fool" blazed in ugly letters. Harold froze. The air around him seemed to still. "Hey, look who's home!" Ricky shouted, grinning. "You like the new paint job, old man? Thought we'd help modernize your ride." His friends laughed. Harold's voice was low, trembling, not from fear, but from something deeper. "You boys got no right." Ricky smirked. "It's just a joke. Ain't like this rust bucket's worth anything." Harold took a step closer, his eyes never leaving Ricky's. "You think worth's got to do with what something looks like?" Ricky shrugged. "If it don't shine, it's trash." For a moment, silence hung heavy between them. Then Harold said quietly, "One day, you'll learn, what's real gold don't always glitter." Ricky scoffed, tossed his empty can, and turned to leave. "Whatever, old man. Should have sold that junk years ago." The boys drove off, leaving a cloud of dust and the acrid smell of paint behind. Harold stood there for a long time, staring at the truck. His truck. Gloria's truck. And then, with steady hands, he began to wipe the paint away, one rag, one tear, one memory at a time. News spread fast in Willow Creek. By the next morning, half the town had heard about the vandalism. Some folks were furious. Others laughed it off as just kids being stupid. But something had shifted. A few people who'd mocked Harold before started looking at him differently. The quiet dignity with which he handled it, no shouting, no police, no vengeance, stirred something in them. When he pulled up to church on Sunday, his truck still scarred with streaks of red paint, even Pastor Williams paused mid-greeting. "Harold," he said softly, "you all right, brother?" Harold smiled faintly. "Been worse, Pastor. Paint don't hurt the engine." The congregation chuckled gently. But not everyone was amused. Out back, Mr. Lewis from Magnolia Development leaned against his car, watching. His assistant whispered, "Sir, looks like folks are starting to side with him." Lewis frowned. "Then we'll have to push harder." 2 weeks later, Harold received a thick envelope from the county office. Inside was a formal notice, an eminent domain claim. The town council had voted to approve the development project. His land was now public interest property. They'd decided they could take it, by law. He had 30 days to vacate. Harold sat on the porch, the letter trembling in his hand. The world around him seemed to fade, the distant sound of a lawnmower, the chirping of birds, the hum of a passing truck. It all blurred into silence. After all these years of working, saving, honoring his wife's memory, this was how it ended. His land, gone. His dignity, mocked. He looked at the old truck, its paint still scarred but standing strong in the evening sun. And for the first time in a long while, Harold whispered aloud, "Maybe it's time they found out the truth." That night, Jalen stopped by after dinner. He found Harold sitting in the garage, the steel lockbox open on the workbench. "Mr. Bennett, what's that?" Harold looked up, eyes glinting in the low light. "The reason I never sold this land." He opened the ledger, its pages yellowed with age. Jalen leaned closer, his eyes widening as he saw the figures. "Sir, is this?" "Every dime Gloria and I ever saved," Harold said softly. "Investments, gold, bonds, property shares, all still under our name. Worth more now than I ever dreamed." "But why'd you hide it in the truck?" Harold smiled faintly. "Because people respect money, but they don't see value in what looks old. I figured the best place to keep something safe is where no one looks twice." Jalen blinked. "You mean this whole time, you?" Harold nodded. "I let him laugh. I let him mock. Because pride don't pay bills, and truth don't need defending. But now? Now it's time to put that truth to work." The next morning, Harold made 2 calls, one to a lawyer in Birmingham, the other to a local reporter he trusted. By noon, a silver sedan pulled into his driveway. Out stepped Clara Jenkins, a journalist from the Willow Creek Chronicle. "I hear you've got a story for me, Mr. Bennett," she asked. He smiled. "Maybe the story's been sitting right here all along." He handed her a folder, property deeds, bank documents, and a photo of him and Gloria at the ribbon cutting of a housing project they'd secretly helped fund 20 years ago. Clara flipped through, her eyes widening. "Mr. Bennett, you've been investing in community projects for decades?" "Quietly," Harold said. "Didn't see the need to make noise about it. But now, the folks trying to take this land, they'll have to face the fact that the man they've been calling poor has been one of the town's biggest silent donors." Clara's jaw dropped. "You're serious?" "Serious as rust on an old truck," he said, smiling. She laughed. "You mind if I print this story?" "Please do," Harold replied. Let's see how loud they laugh now. The next morning, the headline hit every doorstep in town. Local mechanic revealed as longtime benefactor of Willow Creek development. Beneath it, a photo of Harold standing proudly beside his old truck, the same one they'd mocked. The story spread faster than wildfire. By evening, the town was buzzing. And by the next week, the governor's office had called. By the time Sunday morning rolled around, the town of Willow Creek felt different. The same people who once crossed the street to avoid Harold Bennett were now slowing down when they passed his house, some even stopping to wave. The Willow Creek Chronicle story had spread beyond the town limits. By midweek, it reached Birmingham, then Montgomery, and eventually, the governor's office itself. At first, Harold didn't believe it when the local postmaster brought him an official letter sealed with the state emblem. Mr. Harold Bennett, the governor of Alabama, requests the honor of meeting you in person. We are inspired by your contributions and would like to visit Willow Creek this Friday. Harold read the letter 3 times, slowly. Then he leaned back in his chair and laughed softly to himself. "Gloria," he whispered toward the picture frame on his wall, "looks like your old man's got company coming." The days leading up to Friday were like nothing Willow Creek had ever seen. News crews showed up, parking along the main road. The diner filled with reporters eating biscuits and gravy while scribbling notes. Even the same men who once teased Harold at the gas station now spoke his name with sudden reverence. "Guess that old man knew what he was doing," Ricky Turner muttered one morning, watching the commotion from across the street. "Yeah," one of his friends replied, "makes us look like fools, huh?" Ricky kicked the gravel. "We did that ourselves." Friday came warm and bright. A small stage had been set up near the churchyard. Folding chairs lined the lawn, and the whole town turned out, men in their Sunday best, women with hats and flowers, children holding handmade signs that said, "Thank you, Mr. Bennett." When Harold stepped out of his house, dressed in his cleanest shirt and worn brown jacket, people clapped. It was the same man they'd seen for years, but now they looked at him like they were finally seeing him for the first time. He smiled shyly, tipping his cap. Then, at 11 a.m., a black SUV pulled up. The door opened, and out stepped Governor Elaine Marshall, tall, composed, her presence commanding yet kind. She approached Harold with a warm smile and extended her hand. "Mr. Bennett," she said, "it's an honor to finally meet you." Harold chuckled softly. "Can't say I ever thought I'd hear that from the governor of Alabama." The crowd laughed, easing the tension. She gestured to his truck parked nearby, freshly washed, its blue paint now bright again, the red spray paint long gone. "Is that the famous truck I've been hearing about?" "That's her," Harold said proudly. "Been through a lot together." "Well," the governor smiled, "it seems she's been carrying more than just memories." They stood on the stage as the mayor introduced them. Cameras flashed. Reporters murmured. When Harold's turn came to speak, he took a slow breath and stepped up to the microphone. His voice was calm, but every word carried weight. "I ain't much for speeches," he began. "But I reckon I owe y'all a few words." The crowd quieted. "I've lived in this town near 50 years. Fixed cars, mowed lawns, raised my daughter here. Never had much, at least not the kind of much folks like to count. But what I did have, was love, and time, and a woman who believed that what's hidden don't need to shine to be worth something that." He looked out over the crowd, eyes glistening. "People saw my old truck and figured that was me, old, beat up, stuck in the past. But this truck's carried my whole life. Memories, laughter, losses, and yes, a few secrets. You see, I wasn't hiding money. I was holding on to meaning. This land, this home, it wasn't just dirt. It was my promise to keep something good safe, for this town, for what it stands for." The governor smiled faintly, listening. Harold continued, "They called me just a mechanic. And that's true enough. I fix what's broken. But sometimes, folks need fixin' too, hearts, minds, how we see each other." A hush fell over the crowd. Even the breeze seemed to still. "I ain't angry with nobody," he finished softly. "Because I learned long ago, you don't gotta prove worth to anyone who can't see it. You just live it. Quietly. Steady. Until truth speaks for itself." For a moment, the whole town was silent. Then applause swelled like thunder. The governor reached over, placed a hand on his shoulder, and whispered, "That was beautiful, Mr. Bennett." He smiled gently. "Just tellin' the truth, ma'am." At the end of the ceremony, the governor presented Harold with a certificate of community honor and a check from the state fund, a grant recognizing his long-standing investments in local education and small businesses. The mayor announced that the old development project had been canceled, replaced by a new initiative named after Harold's late wife, the Gloria Bennett Community Center. Harold stood there, blinking back tears as the crowd cheered. Jalen, standing near the front, couldn't stop smiling. The boy who once asked why people laughed at Harold now looked at him with pure pride. "See that, Mr. Bennett?" Jalen said when the ceremony ended. "They finally see who you really are." Harold chuckled, eyes warm. "Don't matter if they see me, son. What matters is they see themselves a little clearer." When the crowd was gone and the cameras had packed up, Harold sat on his porch with a cold glass of sweet tea. The old blue truck sat in the driveway, its metal glinting under the soft sunset. Governor Marshall had gone, but her words lingered. "Men like you remind us what leadership looks like, quiet strength." Harold took a long sip, sighed, and smiled. "Guess we did all right, huh, Gloria," he murmured. The wind rustled through the magnolia tree, and for a moment, it felt like she was right there beside him, laughing, proud, at peace. The weeks after the governor's visit were like spring after a long winter. Willow Creek, the little town that once treated Harold Bennett like a relic, now seemed to carry itself differently, prouder, warmer, more aware. The diner where the old men once laughed at his truck now had a framed newspaper clipping above the counter that read, "The Mechanic Who Saved a Town." Every morning, Harold stopped by for his coffee and grits, waving at the same folks who once avoided eye contact. Now they saved him his favorite booth by the window. "Morning, Mr. Bennett," the waitress would say, refilling his mug with a smile. "Morning, Clara," he'd reply. "Looks like sunshine's finally sticking around." One Friday afternoon, as the church bells rang in the distance, Harold sat on his porch with a pen in hand. His daughter, Danielle, had just called to check in from Birmingham. She'd been proud, not just because the governor had come, but because, for the first time, her father's story was being told truthfully. Still, Harold had something left to say, something no one else knew. He took out an old envelope, the kind yellowed at the edges, and began to write. "To whoever finds this. I reckon by now, folks know I kept some things quiet. Maybe too quiet. But everything I ever did was for the sake of peace, mine, and this town's. I didn't keep money hid to make myself rich. I kept it safe so it could serve somebody when the time was right. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and the time's come. Don't use what I left behind to make noise or statues. Use it to give hands to those who never had one reach out to them. Build something that lasts longer than laughter. Build hope. Harold Bennett." He folded the letter neatly, sealed it in an envelope marked "to be opened after my time," and placed it inside the glove box of his truck. Then he sat back and watched the sunset spill gold across the sky. A few months later, the town woke to quiet news: Harold Bennett had passed peacefully in his sleep. Word spread fast. The same people who once whispered jokes behind his back now wept openly on porches and sidewalks. The church bells tolled, low and somber, for the man who'd lived among them without asking for praise. At his funeral, the church overflowed. Farmers, teachers, mechanics, even the governor herself, all came to pay their respects. Danielle stood at the front, holding her father's photo, Harold in his faded overalls, smiling beside his truck. When it came time for the reading of his will, no one expected what came next. The town's lawyer, Mr. Jenkins, adjusted his glasses and unfolded a handwritten note, Harold's final instructions. Mr. Bennett left behind a fund of $1.3 million, accumulated from land sales, investments, and private holdings, he announced. Gasps filled the room. But Jenkins wasn't done. He requested that the funds be split into 3 parts. Half to build the Gloria Bennett Community Center. A quarter to fund scholarships for underprivileged youth in Willow Creek. The remaining quarter to establish a local repair co-op, providing tools and training for young mechanics. The crowd was stunned. Tears flowed freely. Even Ricky Turner, the man who once called him that broke grease monkey, stood in the back with his head bowed. A year later, Willow Creek was barely recognizable. The new community center stood tall where the old post office used to be, bright red bricks, white columns, and a plaque at the entrance that read, "Built in memory of Harold and Gloria Bennett, for the hands that build, and the hearts that mend." Inside, kids laughed in the library, parents attended job workshops, and a small garage at the back taught trade skills to anyone willing to learn. Danielle visited often, sometimes with Jalen, the same boy who'd once stood by Harold's truck, asking why folks laughed at him. Now, Jalen wore a crisp blue mechanic's uniform with Bennett Co-op stitched proudly on the chest. "Your dad changed everything, Ms. Danielle," he said one afternoon, wiping grease off his hands. "He made me believe a man's worth ain't in what he drives, but in what drives him." Danielle smiled through tears. That's exactly what he'd say. Harold's old blue truck was restored and placed under a glass canopy beside the community center. Its hood, still scarred from years of labor, gleamed in the sunlight. Kids pressed their faces to the glass, reading the small sign beneath. This truck carried more than tools, it carried faith. Sometimes, older townsfolk would stop and stare quietly, remembering how they once mocked it. Now it stood as a symbol of humility, of second chances, and of the quiet power of doing right without seeking applause. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the trees, Danielle sat alone on the center's steps. The cicadas hummed, and the faint smell of engine oil drifted from the garage. She pulled out her father's last letter and read it again. Every word felt like a whisper from him, steady, sure, eternal. Then she looked up at the old truck and smiled softly. "You did it, Daddy," she whispered. "You fixed what was broken." The wind rustled the trees, and a single magnolia petal floated down, landing on her lap. She laughed through her tears. Somewhere, she knew, Harold Bennett was smiling too. Harold Bennett was never after fame, never after riches. He just wanted to do good, quietly, faithfully, and with his hands. Sometimes, the people we overlook carry the greatest treasures, not in banks or safes, but in hearts that never stop giving. So the next time you see someone who looks like they don't have much, remember Harold's story. Because maybe, just maybe, they've already got more than enough. If this story moved you, like, comment, and share it with someone who needs hope today. And don't forget to subscribe to Buchi Grind for more real, powerful stories like this one. Because every small story deserves to be told, and every soul deserves to be seen.